All right. So, guys, thank you all so much for joining us. This is our very first Acorn Education question time. And really, it's your opportunity to ask questions to this great panel that we pulled together of young professionals that are all working in the low carbon energy or climate change space. They've also all been involved in the Acorn project in some way, shape or form. And they have been involved in some way with Pale Blue Dot. So most of the young professionals that you're going to meet today are still working with Pale Blue Dot, and Hazel actually is still working with us, but as a contractor. So she's got some other interesting pursuits outside of Pale Blue Dot that I'm sure she'll tell you a bit about today. Just before we get kick-started, I wanted to say a massive thank you to Morag from the Girls in Energy programme for setting up all of the logistics for today, and an even bigger thank you to all of you and your teachers, because the questions that you sent in were just fantastic. We really did have a pretty hard time trying to select the ones down that we would answer today. And what I'll say to you is, if we haven't answered your question and you still are really keen to get a bit of feedback on something, then we'll do our best over the coming weeks to try and get some responses into the ones that we couldn't cover today in the session. As we're sort of short in time, I'm going to ask our panelists if we can just remember to be short and sweet with your answers. I'm going to try and get through as many of the questions as possible, and if possible, we'd like to have a bit more of a relaxed session at the end where we can have a bit of discussion and Q&A just on things that have maybe come up as you've been hearing what the panelists have got to say. And with that in mind, I'm just going to get started, and I'm happy that all of our panelists have been able to make it today. I know that you've seen them already on the YouTube videos, but I'm going to ask each of them just in turn to introduce themselves in a minute or less. So the time is ticking. I'm going to start with Hazel, if you wouldn't mind doing your introduction first. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. So hi everyone, I am Hazel and I'm originally from Stonehaven in the northeast of Scotland, and I studied geophysics and then did a master's in carbon capture and storage, and I've been working in the kind of low carbon energy sector for over 10 years, and I've actually been with Pale Blue Dot Energy in different roles for 5 years. So I'm currently doing project management and education outreach as well. Now, as Kirsty touched on, I'm also an explorer in residence for an organisation called the Royal Scottish Geographical Society, and I've undertaken remote ski expeditions to Arctic Norway and also crossed Alaska by bike and kayak to highlight the impact that climate change is having on different places and on the people that live there. And so I share a lot of these stories through webinars, talks and blogs as well. How did I do on time, Kirsty?
Perfect. Well done, Hazel. All right, I'm going to move to Charlie next, if that's okay. Charlie, do you mind doing your introduction?
Yeah. Hi, I am Charlie Hartley and I am from Banchory in northeast Scotland. I studied economics at university and I joined Pale Blue Dot in 2016, and I've been working on the Acorn project for almost all of that time. Outside of work, I'm involved with a youth climate leadership charity in Scotland called 2050 Climate Group, and so I'm representing youth in the kind of climate leadership space on a couple of different government forums in Scotland as well.
Thanks, Charlie. David, if you don't mind if I've not put you off too much.
Yep, so I'm David Pilby. So I've been at Pale Blue Dot for about 5 years now. So I studied chemical engineering at Heriot-Watt, and I guess my role has taken me through a whole bunch of different aspects, from kind of resource efficiency and getting to go and have a wander around distilleries and look at how they're using energy, as well as what they do with their co-products. So all of the leftovers from the whiskey making process, through to working on the Acorn project, both on the carbon capture and storage side of things, as well as on the hydrogen side, looking at things like the Aberdeen Vision project, which is looking at how you might introduce hydrogen into Aberdeen.
Perfect, David, thank you. And Elle, do you mind your 1 minute intro?
Cool. So hi everyone, I'm Elle Lashko. I'm originally from down south in England, but where I did my university degree in geology at University of Southampton, and then I started working for an oil and gas consultancy before, and also did a master's in petroleum engineering. then decided to use my skills for a different reason, and that's when I joined Pale Blue Dot in 2019 now. So been here for just under a year and a half, and moved up to Scotland in that time as well. So I'm working for Pale Blue Dot as a geoscientist, and most of my role at the moment is working towards our permit application, which will allow us to inject CO2 into the subsurface.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Shale. And then we've been having a little bit of trouble with Emma's sound. So Emma, I'm going to get you just to try and speak so that people can see you anyway, and then I'll do an intro if we can't hear you.
Hi, is that working?
Yeah, you're still really quiet. So Emma is not normally as quiet as a mouse, let me assure you. Emma's not going to be answering questions specifically today, but she works with me in the communications team and looks after mainly, well, lots and lots of things, but a lot of marketing, and she's our sort of social media guru as well. So at some point, probably towards the end of the session, we're going to ask if people don't mind switching their cameras on and giving us a wave or a little shout. We're going to take a screen grab so that Emma can put something up on Twitter for anybody who's willing to put their cameras on for part of the session. So Emma's going to be listening and making lots of notes, and hopefully going to be tweeting about some of the stuff that we've been talking about today later. So Emma, give us a wave and we'll move on. It's a very unusual place for her to be quiet. All right, so thanks so much, everybody. I'm going to move really swiftly on to our first question. And the first question it's coming from, I think it's Anita is how I pronounce your name, from Meldrum Academy. So Anita, do you mind sticking your camera on if you can, and starting with your first question? And it's a question that we're going to put to Elle.
So what does a geoscientist do on a CCS project?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the question. So there's many different things that I get involved with, and sort of in the subsurface team as well, we get involved with on a day-to-day basis. But largely within a CCS project, we're involved in the S part, I guess, which is the sort of storage side. And like many sort of different geoscience roles, there's many different aspects to the storage side, and some of that might be looking at the geochemical interactions that might happen, the geomechanics. So we're looking to make sure that the site is nice and secure when we're injecting CO2. And all of this work goes into what we call the characterization of the site, which basically tells us everything we need to know before we go to inject CO2 and how that CO2 might react with the rock. We also look at how much CO2, so-called storage resource, which is essentially how much CO2 you can hold safely and securely under the subsurface as well. So a big part of my role goes into doing that, but there's lots of different people from all different realms of geoscience that feed into that big piece of work.
Thanks so much, Elle. All right, our next question is from Beth Cowie from Gordon Schools.
Just wondering, what opportunities are there in this area for those who want to study business or economics, and how could they go about doing this?
Thanks, Beth. So Charlie, I was going to put this one to you, seeing as you're an economics, you've got an economics background.
Yeah, of course. That's a really good question. I think when we think about energy and infrastructure projects, we tend to assume that all of the careers are like science and technical based, like Elle on the geoscience side, David is an engineer. But as well, like the projects and businesses that come from all of this great technical work can actually only go ahead if there's a business that can run alongside it. So in business and economics, what we're really looking at in this area of work is how the commercial structure is set up, how the costs of the project are calculated, and what the economic benefits are for the economy and for like the local society and the broader society. In this particular project as well, and with a number of other renewable and low carbon energy related projects, there's also a lot of work that goes into other societal benefits which come about as a result of the project taking place. So for example, there are benefits in health because the quality of air is better in the longer term, and we can measure all of these different things through applying economics to this type of project. As well as that, economists can apply their skills to the government side of things, so looking at how government policies and their ambitions match and align with projects which are in development, and ensuring that any government incentives that are put in place to support projects such as this are actually incentivizing for the projects to go ahead. So I'm in the government and policy side of economics in my role at Pale Blue Dot, but we do have some people in our team who are much more focused on, I guess, like hardcore economics, like the traditional mathematic applications of how the commercial and economic modelling for the project will be done. So lots of opportunities.
Yeah, and so Charlie sits within the communication and stakeholder team. And you've got quite an interesting kind of crossover role, don't you, Charlie? You do a lot on policy and regulation, but you also support a lot of the communication and stakeholder work as well. So quite a varied role.
Just the way I like it.
All right, can we move to? All right, I'm gonna ask Lois's question to David. Lois, if you manage to get your sound back, then give us a wave, and I'll make sure that we include you later on. So Lois's question, and it was also one that was asked by Ayla from Mintlaw Academy, was what subjects did you take in school, and which would you recommend to become a chemical engineer, David?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess from my perspective, the subjects that I took that probably helped the most would have been maths, physics, and chemistry. Probably not much surprise that, you know, taking chemistry as a chemical engineer. But those are the ones that, you know, throughout university that they kind of lay the foundations for everything else that you'll end up doing. And for anyone who maybe didn't necessarily take all of those subjects, that in the first couple of years at university, quite often it was focused on bringing everyone to the same page on kind of those fundamentals. Outside of that, I think graphic communication was something else that I took that kind of helped a little bit. It was kind of slightly more peripheral because it just kind of helps when you're looking at kind of engineering drawings and things, just making it a bit easier to understand what it is you're looking at, and kind of getting up to speed with that a bit quicker. But absolutely the key ones, definitely maths, physics, and chemistry, and then engineering is basically just applying all of those to real world problems and trying to come up with solutions for them.
David, graphic communication, was that at uni you did that, or was that something you studied at high school?
That was something at school. So it's kind of basically kind of technical drawings and things, and through to doing thematic design, and it was also rendering, which is my favorite term for coloring in.
I would say, as somebody who works with David as an engineer, he's a very good engineer to work with from a communications point of view, because he's got a great way of being able to explain complex engineering work in a relatively simple way. So if that was down to your graphic communications, then I would give that a big thumbs up for anybody moving into this space.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. That English as well is probably underrated from an engineering point of view because of the number of reports and things that you have to be able to write. So from the kind of communication point of view, then that's definitely a big help as well.
Thanks, David. All right, our next question is from Emily Campbell from Meldrum Academy, and this question is going to Hazel. So Emily, if you're able to turn your camera on, we'll be out.
What skills do you use in your job, and did you learn any new skills?
Thanks, Emily. So Hazel, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Emily. That's a really, really good question. So in my job, I use loads of different skills, including project management. So this is being able to be really organized and make sure that I know, all the different things that need to be done to deliver a piece of work, a project, and also to make sure that everyone in the team knows what they're doing and that we're all kind of working towards the same goal. The other piece is really around data analysis, so having lots of different pieces of data and being able to make sense of it all. So using spreadsheets in Excel is something that I use pretty much every day in my job. teamwork, that's a really, really important skill, just being able to work with other people, and especially at the moment when we're all working remotely, being able to make sure that you know what everyone's doing and that we're all kind of working together. Writing reports, again, based on what David said, that English piece, that skill of writing, and really prioritizing, deciding, what's important and being able to focus on that. But in terms of what I've learned and skills I've picked up in my job, some of those I've had to learn. But what I've found has been really, really important from the start, and I've had to work to get much, much better at, is being able to communicate some of the complex science and engineering in a really simple way that others can understand. And again, this is building on what David touched on. Now, at university and at school, I used to be terrified of raising my hand or standing up or speaking in front of the class. Anything where I had to do that, I would, if I had to do a presentation, I'd get no sleep the night before. I would be shaking as I stood up there, and I just hated it so much. But what I've worked really, really hard at is to be able to develop this skill. So even though I was terrified, I would force myself to ask questions and put up my hand. I would say yes to presentations, even though, my heart was pounding and I was terrifying the whole time. But what I find is that each time it gets less and less scary. What I've come to learn is that our voice and how we can communicate is the most powerful tool that we have. And it's really how we can share stories and ideas and help people and actually make changes in the world. And if you think about it, there's not much use just knowing something and having it intellectually in your head. You've really got to be able to then share it with others, bring others on side. And so, communication, whether it's written in the kind of English sense or spoken as well, is just a huge, huge asset. And I was actually told years later after my interview that one of the reasons that I was hired was my good communication and presentation skills. And now I've been able to stand up in front of audiences of 250 people and not worry about speaking in front of them. So really think about that, and for yourselves, how can you use your own voice? Start saying yes to doing scary things, like putting your hand up, asking questions. Like, this forum is so good for that. It's terrifying, but it gets less terrifying every single time you do it. And so building up your communication skills now is really one of the best things that you can do, no matter which career path you go down. So that would be my top tip.
Thanks, Hazel. It's magic. All right, so Isla, we've got Isla Barrow from Meldrum Academy, and Isla, based on what Hazel just said, we're hoping you're going to be able to speak up. This is also a question that came from another Isla from Mintlaw and from Anita. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Anita, from Meldrum Academy as well. So this question is going to Charlie. Isla Barrow from Meldrum, would you be able to switch on and give us your question?
Yeah, what type of jobs do you see becoming available in the low carbon energy sector in the future? And how would we be able to prepare ourselves to enter a completely new field of work?
That's a really good question, Isla. So the low carbon energy sector is in its early years, and we're really fortunate to work here at the moment, but it needs to grow a lot in order to have enough businesses and enough projects up and running to meet our climate change targets, and the ones we have in Scotland and the UK, but more importantly the global target that we have to reach our to limit temperature growth to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So with that in mind, I really think that there's a job in the low carbon energy sector for everyone who wants one, and particularly for people at your age and stage where you'll be entering the workforce in the next few years, or after you've done higher education. So a job for everyone who wants one, and in so many different areas as well, in technical roles, commercial, legal, accounting, human resources, research, communications, marketing, policy, you name it. The industry needs to grow so significantly to meet our ambitions. That makes it a really exciting place to join. And the second part of your question about how you guys can prepare yourselves, I think as a generation you're already really well placed to join this sector because you've grown up knowing about climate change, and I really believe that a lot of you will know more than some of the people already in the sector who've joined from other sectors, because of that knowledge that you've had and how it's, you know, it's part of your school curriculum for some of you, like, which just was not the case for me, and certainly not the case for, you know, my parents and some of our older colleagues at work. So bear in mind that you know more than you think you do. You know more than some of the people in the sector at the moment. And if you are motivated to tackle climate change and you're committed to keep learning both now and throughout your career, then I really think that you have a key role in like contributing to tackling climate change and like meeting our targets and having a really good career in this really exciting space. So you're more prepared than you think you are.
Charlie, what would you say about maybe opportunities if they come up to get some work experience beyond academics or study as well?
That's a really good point. So I think that a really important part of work experience is just saying yes to opportunities and seeking them out, even if there are not opportunities available in what you would consider to be like a kind of mainstream low carbon energy opportunity. For example, if you don't just think that a work experience opportunity is only relevant if it's in a company that's doing something that you think is appropriate, for example. Like someone who I know in the industry is really excelling in the industry, and she did work experience in a fish factory to learn about how a technical process worked and all the different elements of the value chain. And I worked, before I joined Pilbley Dot, I worked for a company that did communications for weddings. Very, very different to the low carbon energy sector, but, you know, communicating clearly and engaging transcends the sector that you're in. So a key piece of advice that I would say with work experience opportunities is seek them out. And if one comes to you that you're not sure if is completely relevant to what you think you want to be doing, really consider doing it anyway, because skills are so transferable. And what you think may be the kind of ladder, a career ladder is not a ladder. It's much more of a kind of complicated walk up a mountain where you've got to like kind of go in one direction and then in another.
Definitely. Thanks, Carly. All right, I'm going to move on to Nicola Grant from Gordon Schools. And Nicola's got a question that's going to David. And it was a question that was also asked by Hannah from the Meldrum Schools as well. So Nicola, if you don't mind sticking your camera on and asking David your question. This is a project specific question, David. So it's about the Acorn project and CCS and hydrogen. Yes, fab, thank you.
Are there any concerns with the project, and once up and running, will it be easy to maintain?
Yeah, this is a great question. I guess one of the things that we're doing at the moment through some of our kind of engineering study phases before we start getting into to actually building and operating the plant, we have a document that's called the risk register. And essentially what that does is it captures absolutely any concerns that we have, either that have come up from bits of work that we've done where we've gone, oh, hang on a minute, you know, we weren't expecting this to happen, so we might need to have a look at that in a bit more detail. And in fact, we'll kind of sit and brainstorm different ways that, you know, things might go or could go wrong, how we might mitigate them. And I guess this is, the risk register captures things, you know, across the whole kind of spectrum of things that could happen within the project. So there will be some risks in there that are technical in nature, so that's due to, you know, how the project operates. Like, are the seals going to fail for whatever reason? But it will also capture anything else that could be kind of commercial, so around the business model. So do we have definition how the business model works? So is that going to change, or is it potentially going to change the design? Are we going to be incentivized to, you know, build bigger bits of kit, or do we need to try and minimize how much it costs to run? And then there's also kind of the political side of things as well, and even on the organizational side of things, do we have the right skill set to be able to design and operate this plant effectively? So yeah, throughout the project, the risk register kind of captures all of these things to make sure that we're looking at them. So it will score kind of how much of an impact they might have. So You know, if it does happen, is it going to be a really big deal, or is it just kind of going to be like, oh, okay, right, we don't quite capture as much CO2 as we were hoping to, but ultimately, you know, everything's still fine, operating safely, or is it going to be like, if could it be a risk that causes the pipeline to rupture, which is obviously, yeah, kind of or it has the potential to be a major accident, and that's something that we absolutely need to look at and come up with ways to mitigate. So the next phase with all those risks is to come up with strategies to either say what work needs to be done to understand the risk, and yeah, either design it out is the first preference, so try and avoid the risk from arising in the first place. And then beyond that, there's a principle called as low as reasonably practicable, which means that from a safety perspective, that you need to do anything that you can to reduce the risk down to as low a level as is possible without incurring excessive cost. And yeah, so it's a kind of an ongoing process, and will be throughout the project, and these risks are kind of regularly reviewed and updated, particularly as they start to arise, and as we start to do work that gives us the answers that we didn't have when the risk was first put into the register.
Thanks, David. And Nicola, I would say and add to what David was saying, that somebody who doesn't come from an engineering background, I sit in some of these risk meetings because from a communications point of view, we need to be able to tell people if we are, you know, if we're worried about some of these risks, or really like raise a big red flag if something has gone badly wrong, and then we need everybody in the team to work out what our response is going to be. And the first couple of times that I sat in these meetings, it was horrendous. And it's amazing watching some of particularly the engineers in the room, because they've just got a completely different way of managing risk and managing like concerns about the project, because their approach is, okay, let's think about the worst possible scenario, what all the things that could possibly go wrong, and then we work our plans to make sure that doesn't happen, or to make sure that there's as low a risk that will happen as possible. And it's crazy, and it's really horrible sitting watching them go through that process, because you think, oh, if I had known that all these things could go wrong, then I maybe wouldn't have done it in the first place. But it's quite an amazing process watching engineers work out all these problems, and then at the end of the day they deliver a project which is quite a substantial infrastructure project. So, you know, back to Charlie's point about work experience, if you guys get an opportunity through the Girls in Energy programme to spend some time with different industry groups that are working in this space, try and get yourselves involved in some of these risks meetings, because it's a very interesting thing to expose yourself to, just to see how people's brains work and how they manage to cope with things which could be, you know, pretty fundamental challenges to projects. Nicola, hopefully that helped to answer your question a little bit, but if we've got more that you want to ask on it, then we'll come back at the end. Thanks, David. Leah, can I ask you to get yourself ready? So this is Leah Finlay from Mintlaw Academy, and Leah's got a question to Charlie, and this is also a question that was asked by, I think I pronounce it Ikra, and Lucy from Mintlaw as well, so quite a popular question. So Charlie, Leah was asking what different professions all work on this project, so on the Acorn project, and what is it like working on this project? You've kind of covered a lot of the professions that are involved already, so maybe just give us a flavour of what you think it's like. No pressure.
Oh, I think it's great, Kirsty. Yeah, I've been part of the business for a long time, and I've seen the Acorn project through its early stage when you know, David and Kirsty and I were working with a lot of academic organisations, a lot of people who worked for universities, and that was an exciting time for a very different reason. We were learning about some of the early stages, about, you know, what was possible with the project. So that was an exciting time because it felt like, you know, the sky was the limit a little bit. And now the project is in a very different phase. We've worked out where the boundaries are, and we're really designing them in much more detail. And we're working with a different set of people, and we're looking at everything in. Our team has grown, our business has quadrupled in size in the last 2 years to upscale to deliver this. And what has been really exciting about that is we've seen lots of other people who are interested in climate change and looking to make a change in their career to come and join this movement that we're creating to get this project up and running. And I take a lot of kind of professional, like, workplace pride in doing that, and I get a real sense of like purpose in the work that we're doing on the Acorn project, particularly given that it's contributing to tackling such a big existential problem that we're facing of climate change. So that's what it's like working on the project. It's most days it's relatively easy to get out of bed and come to work. I think it's a really important project that we're doing, and I really enjoy working with such a dynamic and a diverse team. Like, as I mentioned earlier, and as the other part of the question, that we have all different professions working on the project. We have people at all different levels. Obviously, all of us here today are young professionals, but we've also got people who've been in different industries for different lengths of time, and when we all come together, it's just a really exciting place to be, with so much to learn from so many other people. So I hope that answers your question, Kirsty. It's a great place to be.
It can be stressful. You are allowed to say that, Charlie. It can be stressful. You have a lot of work on. But yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Thanks, Charlie. All right, Leah, I'm really sorry. You seem to be dropping on and off that call as Charlie was answering, but this has been recorded, so hopefully we can share that back, that part of the recording back with you. And if there is anything that you want to pick up further, do flag it and let me know. You can wave your hand on Blackboard. All right, I'm going to move to Lucy. So this is another student from Mintlaw, and it's a project-related question again. So Lucy Keto, and this is a question that was also supported by Eva, and it's going to Elle. So Lucy, if you're able to ask your question.
So what inspired you to start this project, and how did you get involved?
Thanks so much, Lucy.
Thank you. So that's a great question. So from my bio, you heard that I started out work actually in petroleum. So I was working as a geoscientist there in an oil and gas consultancy. And I really enjoyed the geoscience part because I got to use all the skills I'd learned at university and sort of through my early professional career to solve subsurface problems. And I really loved that part, but the passion for me wasn't there in the petroleum side. So what I really looked to do was try and see how I could transfer my skills and use them in a way that gave me more purpose, and that for me was really tackling climate change. So what I started to do was, while I was working, I was continuing to kind of learn more and gather more skills in the position that I was in, but started looking at different companies that are on Twitter or on social media and LinkedIn, anywhere that I found like that I was searching for, that people that were doing interesting projects or had something interesting to say, and I started to generate, which is now quite a long list on just a notepad on my phone, whenever I saw an interesting person or speaker, and sort of kept them as a little list of companies that I was interested in and sort of wanted to hear more about. And when I was doing this, I was also at the same time looking for conferences and things to attend where I could meet people that were working in the industry. And actually at one of them, I met one of our directors, Alan James, who was speaking at a young professionals, I can't remember what the event was, but it was a young professionals conference. And so I met him and started learning more about the project in that way. And I found that the Acorn project aligned both with my skill set, so I can still use my geoscience skills, but it aligned also with my drive for tackling climate change. So I guess the answer would be networking, but sort of very proactive networking and getting out there and making sure you're listening and collecting views from lots of different places and starting to learn about things. And going back to what the others were saying later, that a direction you might go into might turn into something else, and that's, you know, where you're meant to be, or something might not work out. So spreading the net as far as you can and sort of seeing where I found that following where my passion took me was kind of how I got to this stage. But yeah, I hope that answers your question a bit.
Thanks, Elle. And Lucy and Eva, I don't know if Elle actually knows this or not, so this might be news, but Alan James that she mentioned, who's one of the directors at Pale Blue Dot, was so impressed. His word was with Elle's tenacity, because she was a bit of a dog with a bone about, you know, she decided this was what she was wanting to do, and she really she was very, not pushy, but just good at putting forward a case that this is what she wanted to do and where she wanted to work. Yeah. So I think that you're probably getting the impression from all of these guys that that ability to just not give up if you found something that you're wanting to somewhere that you're wanting to work and something that you're wanting to do, then have a bit of something special and show your spark, I think is a great way to be. All right, thanks, Elle. I'm going to move to Sophia, please. Sophia Gibbs. So this is another student from Mint Law. David, this is a question for you, and it's quite specific. So David obviously was the face of the hydrogen YouTube video, and he is a bit of a resident expert on all things hydrogen. So Sophia's got a specific hydrogen question for you, David. Sophia, if you can even just raise your mic, if you've got your camera, even better.
When you make the hydrogen, will it be stored first or just transported away from site? If stored, how much will you be able to hold?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the Acorn Hydrogen Project, what we're looking to do initially is to actually blend the hydrogen into the national transmission system. So up at St Fergus is where a lot of the natural gas lands from oil and gas offshore, and it's then transported into the NTS, or the National Transmission System, which is operated by National Grid, and from there it kind of flows south through Scotland, and actually quite a lot of the gas is used in England as well. So I think around about 35% of the UK's natural gas actually flows through St Fergus. So because of this big volume of gas, we can actually blend in, you know, a really small amount of hydrogen. So we're proposing doing 2% by volume, which means that it doesn't sound like a lot, but because of the large flows that are kind of going through St Fergus, it means that it's actually quite a large amount of hydrogen generation. But the low blending also means that it's a really low impact to all of the existing gas users. So there are only a few users who might be sensitive to gas quality, and that's, I guess, something that can be managed through deblending the gas or adding some additional facilities to take the hydrogen out if it really does become a problem for them. But that's one of the kind of initial things that we're looking at. What we're looking at in parallel is aligned with the Aberdeen Vision project, which is to actually take a hydrogen pipeline from St Fergus directly to Aberdeen and blend hydrogen into the distribution network. So the distribution network is, I guess, it's what's actually delivers the natural gas into your house. So the NTS being high pressure, and that's like kind of cross-country transportation, and the distribution network kind of takes it from those pipelines, and, you know, I guess kind of like the arteries and things in your body, it goes through into the small little capillaries and into everyone's house, so that they can receive gas and cook and heat their homes. But because of the difference in pressure, it means that actually the users, or like domestic users, are less sensitive to gas quality, and in fact existing boilers can take up to around about a 20% blend. So that's kind of what we're looking at as an initial step on the distribution network. And then there's plans to, in the future, kind of bump that up to 100% hydrogen, but that means that there's a lot more kind of planning and engineering that needs to go into that, because it involves changing out kind of gas burners and boilers and things, so that everyone can take a higher blend of hydrogen. So the initial steps that we're doing, we don't actually need storage because we're planning to blend it. So there are some concerns around seasonality. So in between winter and summer, there's quite a big difference in gas demand, unless you've got some crazy people who are heating their homes in the middle of summer. But yeah, so the gas demand in summer in winter is quite a bit higher. I think it's roughly about kind of 4 times higher than it is at its lowest in summer. And so managing that then becomes quite difficult, and that's where storage starts to come in. So with natural gas, it's quite easy because for a start, we've already got gas kind of in reservoirs and things. So when we don't need it during the summer, we can produce it at a slower rate. Alternatively, there are facilities like the Rough facility that was built to store natural gas. So that was involved kind of compressing the gas down into the reservoir during the winter. Sorry, not during the winter, during the summer when the gas demand was lower, and then kind of taking it out of storage in winter when the demand gets higher. And so this helps mitigate things like the Beast from the East a few years ago, when gas demand was suddenly quite a lot higher than it normally would be at that period in winter. And so that becomes quite a big challenge when we're talking about hydrogen in the future, particularly if we start to move towards 100% hydrogen, because hydrogen is a lot less dense than natural gas. So it's harder to kind of store and kind of keep that energy over longer periods. So there's kind of, at the moment, we're kind of having a bit of discussion looking at kind of having a balance between how our current natural gas system operates and how the electricity grid operates, because electricity is also very difficult to store for long periods. So we don't have huge battery farms or anything to try and store electricity from summer to winter, but the electricity network doesn't have quite such a big swing in demand. So on the electricity side, it's kind of managed through having plants that don't necessarily operate year round. So you might have multiple plants that kind of do smaller capacities. So you can have all of them operating over winter and maybe like about half of them operating over the summer. So hydrogen's likely to kind of have something in between where we try and store as much as we can, but then we might also need multiple trains of hydrogen generation that don't operate at their full capacity year round. But yeah, the other option for hydrogen storage is kind of in salt caverns. So that's another area that's being looked into, because the seasonality becomes quite a big concern as you move towards 100% hydrogen and guaranteeing the security of supply.
Thanks, David. So Sophia, hopefully that's helped answer your question. I think fair to say that storing of hydrogen is one of those big challenges that David's going to be pretty occupied with for a few years to come. So you guys might find yourselves working in something similar if you do decide to work in this low carbon energy space. All right, I'm going to move to a question from Alana Gray. Alana, I'm really sorry, I don't have the school that you're from, so maybe you could tell us that when you ask your question. It was also a question that was asked by Beth and Nicola from the Gordon schools, and it's going to Elle. It's one that we actually get quite often, so Elle, this is about CO2 storage. So Alana, do you mind asking your question?
CO2, once stored, does that involve monitoring forever, and are there any plans to eventually remove it?
Thanks, Alana. Did you hear that okay, Elle?
Yeah, that was great. No, thank you very much. So monitoring is, as you've picked up on, a really large part of what we do, what we're planning to do, and what at the moment obviously we're not operating, and what we will be doing in the future. And I like to break it down into different sections over different periods of the site life, and the monitoring will change slightly. That I think you're alluding to in over that different life cycle. So before we start injecting any CO2, we have to first collect a baseline, and that tells us what the system is like normally with no CO2 injection. We'll then monitor throughout the period of injection, however long that may be. In our case, it's about 25 years, and then we have the post-injection period, and that's where that is broken into two. And you have a period where although we're not actively injecting into the site, we still own what's called the operatorship, or the operator would own the operatorship for that site. And that is a period where we're just establishing how the system is stabilizing. It gives us a period of time to sort of see how the CO2 is moving and is sort of collecting in the way that we expect it to. And if that goes positively as we expect it to, certainly with the ACORN project, we then move into what's called a post-closure period, where we look to hand back the site to the UK. It's called the UK Competent Authority, but it's basically the UK government, and they then take ownership for the site, but there will be a bit of monitoring through that period. Now, going back to the post injection period, that's between up to about 20 years, around that sort of ballpark of time. And then the post closure, so when the UK Competent Authority have responsibility, that's about 30 years. So you're looking, but it all depends on how well the site is performing. If there's anything that we see that's not reacting in the way that we expect it to, then it might be a bit longer, or if it's doing really well, then it might be a bit less. So, but around 50 years. But the frequency and the intensity of that monitoring is expected to decrease as you go through time, as the site sort of settles and becomes becomes what we will leave it as finally.
Thanks, Elle. And Alana,
yeah.
Yeah. So I was just going to say to Alana and Beth and Nicola that there's maybe something we could pick up later. That Elle's really good at explaining. There's a process that happens when you put carbon dioxide into the rocks that we're dealing with, and the first way. Remember, I think Morag's maybe showing you the chocolate experiment that we do to help explain it, where you've got like the layers of rock which are like the dairy milk that physically stop carbon dioxide from being able to rise up. But there's a process which happens over time, and depending on the rocks and depending on the chemistry within the rocks, it happens at different time scales. But you actually, over time, you end up not just having a physical barrier stopping the CO2 from rising up, but the carbon dioxide chemically changes inside the rocks and is permanently fixed there. So the longer that the CO2 stays within those rocks, over that time, we get comfort about the carbon dioxide being permanently stored forever and ever. So it's probably something that needs a wee bit more explanation, and it's if it's an area that you guys are interested in, we can look to explain that in a bit more detail at some point, I think, if that's okay, Elle.
Yeah, definitely.
Not a Kirsty explanation, a proper geophysicist explanation of it. All right, thank you. I'm going to move really quickly on to Philippa Donald from the Gordon Schools, and Philippa's got a question. So these questions are now all related specifically to carbon capture and storage and hydrogen, not necessarily about the ACORN project. This question from Philippa is going to Hazel. It is, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. If this technology has been available for so long, Norway has been using it, CCS, for 20 years, why haven't we been using it?
That is an excellent question, Philippa, and a very good, very well observed, a very good observation. So this really comes down to quite a simple commercial situation. So it's not about the technology, it's all about the money, essentially. So at the moment, it is currently cheaper to just dump carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than actually do anything with it. For example, capture it and actually store it. And this is because the social and the environmental cost of this carbon, so this is the fact that excess carbon dioxide is causing climate breakdown, it's tipping the natural world out of balance, has not been fully factored in as a cost. And so what needs to happen is governments then have to step in, and governments provide either incentives, so these are maybe grants or subsidies, so something to encourage companies to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions, or governments can also provide disincentives, so these are taxes for companies that pollute. So there's the kind of two ways that they can approach this. And so in Norway, the government has factored in this social and this economic cost of the carbon, and they have what's called a carbon tax. So in Norway, any company that emits carbon dioxide has to pay $94 for every single ton of carbon that they put into the atmosphere. And there are actually plans to triple this to make it $237 for every ton by the time we get to 2030, so in 9 years' time. And so the project that they've been doing in Norway, so for example, there's one called the Sleipner CO2 storage project. Now, that is actually injecting carbon dioxide that was originally coming from a natural gas field. So they produce the gas, just like the kind of normal oil and gas industry, but they can't sell the gas with all this carbon dioxide in it. So they've separated it off, and because there's this really hefty tax, they can't just, well, they could just dump it in the atmosphere, but they'd have to pay a lot of money for that. So it's actually cheaper in Norway for them to re-inject this split off carbon dioxide from the gas and re-inject it back down in a well, down into sandstone, into the subsurface, and store it. So essentially doing carbon capture and storage. And so in Norway, the balance, because the government's intervened and they've set up this carbon tax, it's tipped the other way, and so now it's cheaper to do carbon capture and storage. Now, this isn't quite the same in the UK. There is a carbon tax, but it's not high enough yet to really incentivize the same behavior. But the government's working really hard at the moment to get the right mechanisms in place to enable this to happen in the UK and to kind of enable the right decisions to be made, so that it's not going to be cheaper to just dump all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and get the kind of climate change and get all the kind of natural world being out of balance. And so when the government gets that right, that's going to enable projects like the Acorn project, which can then help the UK reduce its carbon dioxide emissions. So in summary, the technology is all there, that's not the issue, it all comes down to the money and the incentives.
Thanks, Hazel. That's really great explanation about a pretty complex subject. And good question, Philippa. So can I move on to Ailey Bain from Meldrum Academy, and she's got a question for Elle about CCS and existing wells.
How does carbon capture and storage affect the decommissioning of existing wells, and will it prolong job opportunities offshore?
Yeah, so I'll take your question in two parts if that's okay. So I'll start with the decommissioning piece. So yeah, like there's lots of existing wells in the UKCS which are drilled primarily for oil and gas. And CCS, that decommissioning of those wells is currently is regulated by a group called OPRED, which is Offshore Petroleum Regulator for Environment and Decommissioning. So that's like a branch of the UK government that oversees that. And so what they do is they've introduced recently through the OGA as well, the Oil and Gas Authority, who regulate the licensing of oil and gas licenses, is they're ensuring and producing guidelines that all the future wells and the existing wells for that are drilled in the UKCS have to be decommissioned with CCS in mind. But what that means actually in reality is that when you have an interval, so like that sandstone layer that I was talking about and Kirsty was just talking about in the videos, where an existing well drills through a sandstone layer that we might want to use for CCS, the operator of that well has to make sure that that interval is going to be disconnected from the surface and we do that by injecting a lot of cement essentially. And what that does is close off any connection, so any CO2 that we put in that reservoir is then disconnected from the well bore itself, and so it won't be able to reach the surface. So that's the way that it will affect decommissioning, and that's already in process now, which is great. And what that means for jobs is that there's a lot of work to be done in the UKCS with wells. And actually, when I was doing a bit of reading for your question, I was surprised to see quite how many wells are not yet decommissioned. There's wells from the 60s which haven't been decommissioned yet. So there's certainly a lot of work to be done for that, both in platforms and in the wells. And some quite exciting things, I think, when you see some of the platforms being taken off from the UKCS. So I can see it being an exciting place to work as an engineer or as a geoscientist. Yeah.
Thanks, Elle. All right, I'm going to move quickly because we're in our last 10 minutes. So if I could ask Eva to get ready. So Eva Rosie from Mintlaw, and Eva's question is to Charlie. So Eva, are you able to ask your question?
Yeah. Are there any other places planning CCS in the UK?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll try and answer quickly for Kirsty's benefit, at the moment there are 5 places in the UK which are currently planning CCS. So we're one of them in North East Scotland. There's also another one in South Wales, and there are 3 in England. And these 5 places are, they all have something in common, where they have, they're known as industrial clusters because geographically they have a higher concentration of CO2 emissions than elsewhere in the UK. And so physically what we'd be looking at is they have a lot of, in one geographical area, they've got a lot of either industrial processing plants, manufacturing plants, or power stations, all in a geographic cluster. So what all of these projects are seeking to do is for all of these different companies to team up and capture their emissions collectively, and then transport them again collectively to an offshore CO2 storage site. So there's 5 in the UK at the moment.
Thanks, Charlie. And I think it's probably worth saying that the Scottish cluster is pretty far advanced because of the fact that at St Fergus we've got these pipelines that go offshore that we can reuse, and we've got this huge volume of CO2 storage because of the rocks that Elle's been talking about. And what we're quite interested in Scotland is the fact that we can store a lot of carbon dioxide, so we maybe have the potential to take carbon dioxide from some of those other clusters in the UK where they maybe don't have such good storage as we have in Scotland, because the Scottish carbon dioxide emissions are somewhat lower than certainly you'll get in parts of England as well. So it's really quite an interesting space to be working in CCS in Scotland. All right, I'm going to move to Isla Hind from Mintlaw again. And Isla's got a question for David, and this was also a question that was raised by Lois and Iona from Meldrum as well. So Isla, if you can ask your question, that'd be great.
How do you capture the carbon dioxide when being produced by the industry, and when it is already in the air, and what technology do you use?
Thanks,
yeah, this is a good question. So when for capturing CO2 from industry at the moment, there are kind of 3 main techniques that you can use. So pre-combustion capture, post-combustion capture, and fuel switching when you're using something like natural gas to either to generate heat or power. So pre-combustion capture involves taking a fuel source, which could be natural gas or coal, and you use a chemical process to turn it into hydrogen, and you capture the CO2 kind of before you actually burn the fuel for energy. So you'd actually use the hydrogen in this case rather than the coal or the natural gas. So this is also kind of what we talk about when we're talking about blue hydrogen production. So it's from a fossil fuel, but we capture the CO2 so that it's low carbon. So we do need to use CCS to store that carbon. Otherwise, if we just emit it, then it's actually less efficient. So post-combustion capture would be the same thing, but instead we use the fuel first, and what's known as the flue gas, so everything that's left over after you burn whatever you're using for fuel, that'll contain CO2, and you can use that there's a whole range of kind of technologies that you can use, but quite often amines are used, and there's a load of different kind of proprietary solvents that get used and are being developed. And so that kind of strips all of the CO2 out of the flue gas, so you can put everything else can still go up the vent stack, and the CO2 can be captured and stored. For fuel switching, you can use something like hydrogen from renewable power or green hydrogen, and instead of using natural gas or coal or another fossil fuel, then you can use the hydrogen directly, but you haven't got that same issue of kind of pre-combustion or post-combustion capture. But there are some industries where the CO2 is actually inherently kind of released as part of the process. So cement is a good example of this. So within the calcination process, you actually end up producing CO2 in order to actually make cement. And in this case, you can use something called direct air capture to actually capture some of these emissions from the air that would have kind of made it out anyways. So direct air capture kind of involves having these great big adsorbent beds. So you can kind of think about it like a giant sponge that's designed to kind of suck up the CO2 out of the air. So you've got fans that draw air through it, and as it draws the air through it, the CO2 kind of gets bonded to these beds, and the rest of the air kind of passes through. And as you they're usually constructed so you've got lots of different cells that are kind of in different stages of regeneration. So once the bed becomes saturated, so think a water sponge that you've kind of run under the tap and it's full of water, you then run it through the regeneration process, which will kind of release the CO2 from it that you've then captured, and you can send offshore for storage. And at the end of that kind of regeneration process, you can bring the bed back online to capture more CO2 out of the air.
Thanks, David. So yeah, there's chemical processes involved in all of it, and Isla, there are ways to capture it from industry, and there are ways that you can actually capture it just directly from the air. But like David's saying, the ones that you're capturing directly from the air, that's quite an expensive process because you've got lots and lots of air, and carbon dioxide's only like a small part of the air, whereas if you're capturing it directly from an industrial source, then you've got much more carbon dioxide in that gas that's going out a chimney or a flue. So we are actually at Pale Blue Dot, we're looking at both those technologies, but the first one that's part of Acorn is that capturing carbon dioxide from industry. But we will be able to tell you a bit more about some direct air capture projects that we're looking at soon, hopefully. So that's quite exciting. Maura, can I just do a quick check? We're at 12:30. I've only got 2 questions left. Am I okay to run over a tiny little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Just carry on.
Okay. Beth, if you can get yourself ready, we've got a question from Beth Cowie at the Gordon School to Elle, and then I'm going to Philippa Donald after that for our final question. So Beth, if you could ask your question to Elle, that'd be great.
Do you think this method of carbon storage is a sustainable long-term plan? Are we going to run out of space to trap the CO2 in? How will we know when this happens, and is it expected to happen anytime soon?
Thank you very much, Beth. And actually questions I asked right at the beginning of my CCS journey as well. So, yeah, so to answer the first part, we recently did a study where we took all of the evaluations that we could find for 12 countries, only 12 countries at the moment around the world. And these were people that have been publishing in journals or, from universities, research projects, all sorts of things. We gathered them together and worked out how much storage resource there was available. And we came up with 85 gigatons, which is 85 billion tons. Correct me if I'm wrong there, David. He's smiling, so I'm hoping that's a good sign. And if we put that in context of the annual CO2 emissions, in 2019, we emitted 33 gigatons. So what you can see, there's plenty of space, and that's just from 12 countries of analysis. So there's definitely lots of space available. So yeah, I do think it is a sustainable approach, but what it is, certainly for Pale Blue Dot, is that CCS is a piece of the cake, as it were, alongside renewables, alongside energy efficiency, all these other measures that we have to take to help lower our emissions. And that's why we like to focus on these really hard to decarbonise areas like cement and energy, and some areas that are really tricky to decarbonise, so that we can all push together in the same direction and help lower CO2 emissions. So I think it's sustainable, yes, but and it has to be part of a complete package to help lower emissions.
Thanks, Elle. And Beth, thanks. It was a really great question. Can I move just to Philippa? Philippa, I've got 2 questions for you to finish up. So the first one is to Charlie, and it's your question about CCS and hydrogen production. So if you want to ask that one, and then I'm going to put your final question to everyone.
Will this project, CCS and hydrogen production, take over from the oil industry in the northeast of Scotland?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and as someone who lives in the northeast Scotland, I think about its future quite a lot. This is quite a regenerative region, so before any of us were around, the region was really known for mining granite. And then when the economic opportunity started to wane there, it moved into fishing. And when the opportunity started to wane there, it moved into oil and gas. Over the next decade, 2 decades, I think we're going to see a regeneration take place again as the oil and gas activity wanes. And I think that this region is really well placed to become a leader in not only CCS and hydrogen. A lot of the skill sets are similar, from oil and gas exploration production with hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. They're both gases. They both require, big pieces of oil and gas infrastructure. But actually, I think this region is going to become much broader than just CCS and hydrogen. We'll see, what Elle referred to as CCS just being a piece of the cake. I think that this region will become, I guess, to build on that an analogy, a bit of an industrial baker. With far more pieces of energy transition activity taking place here. And actually what I think this region is really well placed to do is to have a much bigger mix, completely separate from the projects that we're developing, is in the North Sea. We're seeing a lot of offshore wind production taking place, which is really great. So in short, I think that all of this energy transition activity will overtake the oil industry in Scotland, but in northeast Scotland. I think it's going to be bigger than just Acorn, and I think it needs to be bigger than Acorn, really, for the region's future.
Thanks, Charlie. Right, Philippa had one question that we were hoping to end with, and it was just an opportunity. Philippa, can you ask your final question to the whole panel?
Yeah. Would you encourage young people like ourselves to pursue a career in this sector, and what are the pros and cons?
Thank you. So I'll go to Hazel first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I would say yes, mainly to be part of the solution. So, as Charlie had said, this is just the start of the sector, and the opportunities are only going to increase as we move towards the UK and the world meeting their climate change targets. So it's a really exciting time to be kind of in at the start of this growing industry. So it's a yes from me.
Thanks, Hazel. And Charlie, Elle, David, anything that you want to add? Shout quickly.
I'll add to that. Yeah, I think for me, there are two things that are quite important in your career. It's doing something that you enjoy, and as kind of some of my colleagues have kind of been saying, that there's kind of opportunities across pretty much any kind of career path that you can think about. But the second part for me is that it's really important to be doing something that kind of gives you a greater sense of purpose. And so kind of doing something to fight climate change then that really helps in some of those days where Charlie is really stressed out, or Kirsty's been in a risk meeting or something, and suddenly panicking about what all the engineers are up to. And so I think that's quite a big thing for me. And it's a great industry to work with, because I think pretty much everyone I kind of come across and work with on a daily basis is all really driven and kind of committed to seeing some of these projects through.
Thanks, David. Charlie, Neil, anything you want to add?
I don't have anything to add on top of what's been said. I think they're really good points, and I agree wholeheartedly.
I guess I'd just like to add as well that because it's starting and because it's changing quite a lot, I think it's a good space to have quite an exciting and changing role as well. And I imagine that lots of the older people in your families or your friends or whatever, they probably won't even, lots of the jobs that you will have when you come to do that is they won't even exist just now, or they might not exist in what you might be doing in 5 years' time. You might not exist in 20 years' time, and it will just be completely different. So I think it will be quite exciting, and definitely lots of room for learning and growing in that. So yeah, big yes for me.
Brilliant. Well, listen, guys, I'm going to bring this all to a close. There were a lot of really excellent questions that we didn't get time for. One of them, there was quite a few people asking about opportunities to travel in this field, and I just wanted to say, obviously nobody's travelling right now, but I definitely think one of the things, building on what Elle said, is that within this sector, there's going to be, certainly in the short term, so in the next 10, 15 years, I think you're going to see the northeast of Scotland doing a lot of real leadership work in this space, like Charlie said, and that brings with it opportunity to travel and to share experience of what you've learned here with other countries. And I think in all of our careers, all of us would probably tell you that we've done some amount of travelling, and that we really enjoy it and love it. So if that is important to you, then definitely something to look at. And don't forget your language skills when you're at university. They always come in handy if you're wanting to travel to different countries. With that in mind, I'm going to probably close the session now because we have run over. Say a huge thank you to all of our panel and ask you to give us a wave. But even bigger thank you to all of the students that have taken time, and the teachers that have been supporting you to come on and ask your questions. And I just really sincerely hope that in the next 6 to 12 months that we do get a chance to meet you all in person, because you've asked us some pretty soul-searching questions today, so it'll be lovely to see you face to face and be able to give you a bit more information, and hopefully just encourage you in the journey that you've got ahead, which hopefully will be a really exciting one for all of you, whatever career path you decide to go down. And yeah, we will be frequent visitors to the Girls in Energy programme, hopefully to all your schools as well. So thanks so much again for all the hard work, and we'll speak to you soon.
Hi.
Take care, guys. Stay safe during lockdown.
And Kirsty, for you and your guys' team has been absolutely brilliant today, so thank you so much for that.
No worries at all.